Hello and welcome to the Land and Blast podcast. On this episode, Chris and Ashley are going to take us through everything in the Southern Oregon vineyard and wine industry in general. So this is an episode full of information, whether you're looking to buy, looking to sell, or just curious about vineyards and wineries. This is the episode for you. So check it out. It's an awesome one. What is the goal of the conversation today, Mr. Chris?
The goal of this conversation is both educational in talking about some of the things that are important when looking at a particular property, but it's also it's going to be an educational piece on the wine industry, but it's also a little bit of an introduction to Ashley and some of her background in this specific industry, in the appraisal world, in the vineyard wine space that we're excited to learn more about and talk about.
Fabulous.
So speaking of Ashley.
Yeah, Ashley, do you mind taking us through your background, a little bit about your background with wineries, vineyards, and
what got you started in, I know you went to Oregon State.
Yep.
What got you started, your interest in vineyard and winery, and how did that morph?
So my sophomore year of going to Oregon State, I took a class called Farm and Ranch Appraisal. Mm-hmm. And I was familiar with other things of real estate, brokerages, lending.
Because your family was in real estate, and that was something you guys...
My dad was a broker for a long time. My grandparents were in the land surveying industry. So I knew that there was lots of careers in real estate, but appraisal was one I wasn't really familiar with. But after that class, I discovered I could take my love of numbers and real estate and kind of combine them into one. And so I kind of pursued appraisal ever since then. I graduated, moved to Walla Walla to work with an appraisal firm there, moved back to Willamette Valley, worked for a number of outfits, including Farm Credit, all within the appraisal space.
So give me an idea of how exclusive or how many appraisers are there that actually specialize in vineyard and winery, say, in Oregon?
Not that many. As far as ones that actually specialize in it, I would say less than a handful. So I was very blessed to have worked and been mentored by Carl Stillman, who is one of the best appraisers in the state, especially for wineries and vineyards. Mm-hmm. And I worked for him for about a year and a half. And he kind of led my passion for that niche market because I saw his expertise in that and how well he served the industry, and I wanted to do the industry the same justice.
Gotcha. And then for approximately 10-year period of time, you worked in that industry on the appraisal side, correct me if I'm wrong?
Yes, until you kept knocking on my door. So my husband and I moved down here to Southern Oregon after we had our second child. And appraisal, being in the wine and vineyard sector, the bulk of the industry is up north. And so I was doing a bunch of traveling, and with two kids and a husband that works on weekends, that was getting really challenging. So I had been looking for kind of a transition in general. And you and I talked about real estate for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then kind of the doors just opened at the right time, and I decided to make the switch.
Which we are very fortunate by the skill set that you bring to the table in appraisal, but I think we're even more fortunate by the skill set you bring to the table of just people and enjoying people and caring about people, as whatever accolades and acronyms you have after your last name for appraisal. That part, the caring for people, I think is even more impactful in our business. Well,
I think that was something else that really resonated with me was when I moved to Southern Oregon and moved into the land leader office, I got to see you and other real estate brokers having real relationships with their clients and making a difference in their lives. And while I thoroughly enjoyed appraisal and thought I did a good job at it, I didn't feel I was making the difference in people's lives I could have by a more relational-based career. Mm-hmm. And so kind of by watching you and other members of our team over time, I kind of wanted to be a part of that. And basically take the knowledge base from appraisal and wineries and vineyards that I'd specialized in and bring that to the brokerage side to really try to make a difference and help people.
Absolutely. So as a result, in the last 5 years, I went from knowing nothing about vineyards to, by some miracle, maybe knowing a thing or two about vineyards. People say.
Undersell. That's a huge
undersell. Hey, you sold quite a few before I even came around. So.
Correct, but I may or may not have had some serious help from people, including yourself, in that process.
If you haven't noticed, Chris is very humble, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Yeah, well.
We'll get to that later, I'm sure.
I guess that, I was fortunate to sell a few vineyards along the way before you started working with us, and I learned, I guess I sold way more farms or farm and ranch than I did, which translates well to vineyard because you still have dirt, you still have water, you still have land use, you still have location and property and all those things. You're just adding a permanent crop and then a whole culture that goes with the wine industry on top of that. When you add the business, you start getting into different varietals of wine and people's preferences, and becomes an art, and it gets really complicated really quickly, and a lot that goes beyond me. I'm not going to pretend to be the wine culture person. You want to talk to Ashley about that side of it, but dirt, soils, location, typical farm attributes obviously still apply. So, and that's really my experience in this side because, again, at the end of the day, it's still a farm. And it is still all comes down to the same basic principles. So anyway,
so kind of with both of your areas of expertise, can we start breaking down some of the nuances of vineyards and wineries? And so, just for me, a layman in the vineyard world, can you explain the different types of businesses that you can have within the wine industry?
Yeah. So it breaks down really into 4 general sectors. You have the vineyard, which is your farm. It's where you grow grapes. It's a farm. Then you have basically you have a wine business, or you can do that in like a custom crush. I mean, you're taking the grape and you're producing a product, a wine. You can either do that at a custom crush level, meaning you go to a facility that's shared by many and there's a winemaker there and you work with them to make a product.
So you ship it off property and it's processed somewhere.
Correct. Or you could take another step and actually develop a winery on site and either hire a winemaker or be the winemaker yourself. And then you have you have the tasting room experience. So you have vineyard, the farming side, the making of the product, and then you have the tasting room or the on-site part of the experience of coming and having, it's a hospitality business. People are coming for the experience, like a restaurant or whatnot. And then, beyond that, then you have all the add-ons that go along with the wine business. What I mean by add-ons is, wineries, or I should say vineyards, are an amazing site for events and weddings and different things of that nature. So you kind of have these multiple layers of business. You have a farm, you have a product that you're creating, and then it goes into the experiential side of you're selling a product and or you're offering add-ons to that.
Gotcha.
So does that make sense how those kind of 4 things? And you don't have to have all 4. You can have 1, you can have 2, you can have 3, or you can tie them all together and have this really large business.
Copy. So I guess from somebody looking at this from the outside, like from a buyer's perspective. So when, what type of individual or what type of buyer is looking at a property like that, especially when there's so many ways you can structure that business? Who do those people look like, or what are they looking for?
And I'll answer briefly, and then I'll ask Ashley to jump in and explain a little bit more. But I generally would qualify those into 2 things. 1, lifestyle. So you're buying for the experience, or 2, commercial, or you're buying for the business side of it, or some combination of both of those. In Southern Oregon, what do you think we see the most of in general?
In Southern Oregon, definitely I would say we see more of the lifestyle buyer, but that's just because of where we live, right? We're not too far from the ocean, we're the mountains, we have all the water sports, kind of whatever you can think of outdoor recreation wise, we have here. And so vineyards allow people to potentially live that lifestyle with some benefits from a tax perspective, and then also by being able to live on a property that is actively managed and cultured and is nice to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the commercial side, I know we see more, I'll call passion projects here than we see true commercial scale. But on the commercial side, describe what that buyer is looking for. I think lifestyle is obvious. You're looking for a fun place to live, right?
Yeah, so lifestyle is all about just the connection to the property.
Yeah.
What are your views like? How do you feel when you go on the property? You could have 1 acre of vineyard or 10 acres or possibly upwards of 30, but a lifestyle buyer, the vineyard is kind of like a bonus versus being the primary reason why they're there.
Gotcha.
Your commercial buyers, the vineyard's the first reason why you're there. They're looking for the return. How many tons is it producing? What kind of pricing can I get? What's going to be my net profit to myself to make this a business venture?
And there's really 2 commercial buyers, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a farm-based buyer who's all about fruit or juice sales.
Yep.
And then there's a wine-based or an estate quality buyer that's where all the overlap of the tasting room and the events and everything over.
So for your winery-based clients, there's a whole bunch of different veins there, right? So like you mentioned, custom crush. Some people will own a label and sell wine, but they don't own a vineyard at all, right? So they're buying fruit from somewhere else, they're processing it somewhere else. They might be living in town, right? But they still own a brand that they can sell through channels. And you can do everything from that all the way up to the fully integrated companies that own their own vineyard, they have their own processing, all their own management, and all their own distribution channels. And so those buyers in general for Southern Oregon are really looking more for like that direct to consumer, like you said, experiential client, because they want to connect with their consumer and they want to have a story behind their brand. That's what we see the most of in Southern Oregon, I would say.
On the commercial side.
On the commercial side, yeah. So they're still looking for the net return and profitability metrics to make a business function. But there's also a passion behind connecting with the consumer that we see a lot.
100%. They're receiving a benefit from owning that property and running that business that's much more than financial.
Correct, yep.
Yeah, makes sense.
And you guys, as you're talking about these buyers, it almost sounds like you're kind of diving into the industry structure a little bit. So how would you describe the wine industry in Southern Oregon? Are there is it broken up in a certain way, or what does that look like?
In general, and again, I'll defer to Ashley here, but the concept, you go to Willamette Valley and you have a certain, and this is where I'm going to show my ignorance, AVA, remind me what AVA stands for.
American Viticulture Area.
Okay, American Viticulture Area. So Willamette Valley has a certain AVA. Southern Oregon is made up of two AVAs primarily, which is Southern Oregon AVA and the Applegate. Talk to me about what that actually means. Like, what is Southern Oregon known for?
So there's a thing people like to talk about called terroir, and that's just kind of one of the...
That's how you pronounce that.
I sure hope it is. That's how I've been saying it for a very long time. So it's a fully kind of, there's microclimates and macroclimates, and it gets very comprehensive, but usually each vineyard that you go to is going to have its own terroir. So we're talking like its own unique soils composition, wind flow, sun, exposure, all kinds of things.
And the long and short of that is it produces a little bit of a different grape, and then you have many different varietals that are going to respond differently to that site.
Which is why you have different aspects. So you'll have different row orientations to get the sun in different directions for different varieties.
And in one site like we're at today can have multiple aspects, multiple soils types, multiple air movement pockets.
So one of the really fun things about Southern Oregon and its climate is it allows you to grow a lot of different varieties really well. Up north in Willamette Valley, you can grow quite a few varieties, but it's kind of known for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. That's kind of like their main two that they grow up north. Down here, you could go on a vineyard and see 10 plus different varieties, which is totally normal.
So circling back, can you go into a little bit more detail about what wine culture looks like in Southern Oregon?
I would say it's really collaborative. Chris and I have helped a multitude of buyers and sellers through the transaction process, and every time we do that, we try to connect them with people in the industry that can help them either take the next step or do due diligence and research. And I've always appreciated how everyone has open doors down here and just really collaborative, and everybody wants what's best and everyone's willing to help each other out.
That sounds great. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, especially for someone who's not an insider to the industry. People have been very welcoming. And Southern Oregon is just neat because that's kind of a reflection of Southern Oregon as a whole, not just the wine industry. And
I think that culture is what makes us working in that industry on the brokerage side so rewarding. Is we get to either help new people from out of the area join the industry, or help local industry members grow their businesses within the same industry. And so there's a lot of reward in being part of that culture.
Sure. So you can really take your intimate knowledge of the industry and apply it to the same cultural fit, but also the person-to-person relationships that we strive so hard to maintain.
Yep. I just had a vineyard manager call me yesterday, and his client's trying to do some lot line adjustments, and he's like, "Hey, who's your surveyor guy?" And so I gave him my surveyor guy's name and number.
Fabulous. And we did talk a little bit about terroir, and it makes me think of varietals. In Southern Oregon, what wine types are there here for a guy that doesn't... All of them. All of the wine.
Lots of, what was the one we were just on? We see a lot of Merlot, Syrah, Petit Syrah, Pinot Gris. I could give you 20 varietals.
Okay.
It's just kind of like a potpourri mix of.
From a farming perspective, the climate here, the water, the growing
Yeah.
season allows for extremely broad spectrum. From depending on the site, you can get some of your colder varietals like your Pinots and so on,
Yeah.
to some of your whites that need a warmer site. You have that whole spectrum. Sometimes you have that whole spectrum even on one property
property.
in
Wild.
Southern Oregon. I think in the Western U.S., I think this has about the greatest variety of varietals you can grow well is anywhere on the West Coast.
Gotcha.
So
So you're used to seeing a lot.
Yes, I think the vineyard that had the most varieties was, I believe, Sundown.
it's like 12 or 13 varieties.
I think it was pushing 20, but part of that was because they had like a test plot where they would grow a whole bunch of varieties for starts for other vineyards.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that was, I think, around 20 is the most
But
I've
that gives
seen.
you an idea.
Yeah, what it
Yeah, I couldn't pronounce half of what they were growing there.
There was one I had not heard of, and I had to do some research on that one, I think.
Copy that. So pulling back, we're starting to talk about specifics about vineyards. So let's broaden this a little bit. So for those wondering what the wine industry and real estate market looks like in Southern Oregon, can you take us through from kind of a big picture perspective what the wine industry and the real estate market looks like in Southern Oregon?
We're going to separate into a couple different categories, break
Okay.
it down a little bit. So we already talked a little bit about this idea of lifestyle versus commercial.
Sure.
Then we have your typical lifestyle is what I'll call a vineyard estate.
Okay.
Where you're pretty much hands off, but you get to look at your property. You get to look at your pretty vineyard. You get to see people, and maybe you have a little label or something that you do over at a custom crush facility, but it's a passion deal. It's not necessarily for profit. We probably see more of those transactions than any other type of transaction based on the available inventory in the market here. As we switch gears into a little bit more of the commercial on the business side, I'll say we have boutique production vineyards where you have a 20-acre vineyard, and I'll still call that boutique, but it is more on the commercial side, and it may not have anything else on it. It may just be a vineyard, and they're producing 4 tons to the acre, and they're selling the fruit, or maybe they're taking some of it to bottle. You also have, I'll call, a boutique level, and when I say boutique, I'm defining boutique as they are very much serving a niche. It's a passion project. It's still a business that they're seeking to be profitable in, but it is very much on this kind of family level.
Gotcha.
You'll also have some boutique level vineyards that are attached to just a tasting room, potentially a home as well in that mix, but you have production of vineyard, and then you have this customer interface where you're selling your product out of a tasting room. You may have some events. And then you'll also potentially at that same kind of boutique level, that family level, have vineyard, tasting room, and winery on site.
Okay.
And that's a little less common because winery generally kicks you more over into like a true commercial side. But we do have some of them here. We've been involved with a couple of those types of transactions over the years, but they're not a lot.
Gotcha.
Now, on the commercial side, so that's kind of the boutique, the 3 levels of boutique after your lifestyle, pure lifestyle. And then you have your commercial vineyard, which we don't have a lot of commercial vineyards in Southern Oregon. You have a lot of commercial vineyards in Oregon as a whole, but we don't have a ton here. And when I say commercial, I'm talking 50 acres and up or something of that range, where you're not just going to be a mom and pop farmer. Like, you need to have a certain skill set and resources. Otherwise, it's going to potentially own you.
Sure.
And then you also have commercial where you have vineyard and winery and potentially tasting room as well, but it's a larger scale operation. It's truly a business. The buyer of that property likely is very much bottom line profit kind of oriented, or at least opportunity oriented, where it may not do that today, but it has the opportunity
Sometime in the future.
with some inputs to get there.
Yeah.
So that's, and so again, to kind of go back through, vineyard estates, there's the most of.
Yeah.
Then I'll call them boutique production vineyards is probably the most readily available product. And then when we get into properties that have tasting rooms and wineries, and whether it's boutique or commercial, it's a very limited supply.
And part of that limited supply comes from that these are like legacy properties, right? So most of the brands here in Southern Oregon are still with the original founders of that brand.
Gotcha. So there's not a whole lot of turnover.
There has not been a lot of turnover. There's been a handful or two of wineries that we're aware of that have sold in the past 10 years down here. But besides those, most of the original operators are still operating.
Wow.
And so
That's pretty impressive, actually.
Well,
it's very impressive.
And a lot of these properties will also transact off market. They won't transact in the open marketplace due to the fact it's a business, and they're trying to preserve the integrity of that business.
Sure.
Yeah, so usually we find out about them after the fact, or the general public will find out about them after the fact when there's a press release saying that there's been a transition or a new owner.
Sure.
And part of that is when you have a brand involved, there's some sensitivities of, well, why are they selling? What's going on? And so that's one of the things we talk to our clients about. If they are in that commercial level, there's some privacy levels, but there's also an opportunity to share your story and resonate with your consumers as you're passing the baton.
Absolutely. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, the sales process is obviously sensitive anytime you're dealing with a business, and the old adage is really hard to sell a secret still rings true.
Yeah.
Yep.
So our preference from a sales perspective is what she just said. Let's find a very positive story, and let's make sure, obviously it has to be factual and truthful, but let's focus on that, and let's lead with that instead of hiding in obscurity as to why.
Yeah, and maintain brand integrity.
And the reality is most of the clients we come in contact with have a very positive story as to why they're wanting to sell. And that usually comes down to family.
Yeah.
Grandkids are on the way. Kids have school opportunities. They're ready to retire and want to travel the world.
Yeah. Time to pass the baton.
Exactly. And so for me, those are always positive transitions that their client base can resonate with, because they too probably have families, and family should always come first. And so, and you never know if the patron that's coming into your tasting room every Saturday might just be your buyer.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
For sure.
So, and then to break it down just really simply for people, we've talked about, kind of the lifestyle property, then you have your boutique, and then you have your commercial. Out of those three, just to break it down again for people, what are the most difficult to find and what are the easiest to find, or other words you'd like to use?
I would say difficult and easy to find is that whole lifestyle. There's that connection to a property.
Yeah.
Right? So somebody might be looking for privacy while somebody is looking for views.
Okay.
And everything in between.
So very person-to-person dependent in that category.
Yeah, I would say the most inventory you're going to have available is going to be the vineyard estate, or possibly sometimes a production vineyard. We're kind of sitting on the hybrid of that right here, where we have, a vineyard estate property, and it's, it definitely could go for, boutique production person, or it could go lifestyle. So this is an example of what she's saying. This is a trade-off.
Yeah.
We don't yet have a estate home that's, recently redone. We have a nice farmhouse.
But we have this.
Yeah.
But we have an
We have
amazing
this
canvas.
amazing pond and views
the
and
whole valley.
privacy.
Yeah, so that's exactly what she's describing is, everything is about taste and preference in the lifestyle world. So that in itself is challenging, but that is the product that is most available. The least available product by far is a commercial operating business, with all the pieces in place. Like those are either making money and the people love them and no way they're going to part with them.
Yeah.
Or it's so sensitive or whatever it might be. So finding those opportunities is the most challenging.
Yeah, or they're building a business because their kids are already involved and their kids are going to take it over, right?
Sure.
So then we're one whole generation removed from that even being an opportunity for somebody.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So
No, that makes total sense. And then I guess kind of expanding on that, for people that are considering, starting one of these, or what should people be evaluating, I guess, when they're looking to buy or establish a winery or a vineyard? Like, how do you advise them? What should they consider?
since the vineyard estate realm is the most prevalent, I think we should just focus on that one to start. With any kind of permanent crop, you need to make sure you have the fundamentals of what you would need to keep that crop going, which would be something like water rights. Water rights is one of those key components. And obviously down here in Southern Oregon, we have different water districts, different sources, all kinds of things that need to be taken into consideration. We do have pockets of coldness and frost, right? So where's the wind coming from? Do you need frost protection? If you do, is it already on site?
Sure.
So those are kind of some of the main things to start off with if you're wanting the vineyard to be viable.
Sure.
Soil,
Locational and environmental is a huge consideration.
and then availability of labor is another thing we've talked about.
Huge.
So in past years, there were more vineyard management companies to serve these vineyard estates, right? These smaller, non-commercial scale, right? If you have a 10-acre vineyard on your with your house, you're not going to be hiring a vineyard manager full time for just you. You have to share that labor. And so we did have one of the larger companies leave the industry for a while, which was a challenge. And that was the same time frame where the cannabis industry was running rampant. And so we had a lot of labor transition.
Gotcha.
So one of the things to look at when you're looking at buying something like a vineyard estate is, what's your succession plan? Is the current management in place willing to stay on? And if not, what's it going to cost to get somebody to come in and help you?
Copy. So some foresight needs to be
Absolutely.
advised.
Yeah, I think I would add to, a couple things, and this is things that you probably take as just automatic, but a lot of people don't have a lot of knowledge about vineyards. So understanding what they're actually buying, I think, is something else that, whether it's an existing vineyard, and not beyond what varietal it is, but
how old is it?
How old is it? What's the spacing? What's the production? What
Has
rootstock?
there been any viruses?
Correct, all those things. And if you're going to plant a vineyard or start from scratch, obviously you already touched on water, soils aspect, but also there is the whole run up of expenses, run up of construction, where do I find the labor, where do I find the expertise to put in all those things? And those are things, there are a few people in the valley who have that skill set, but not a lot, and you're not just going to find them a lot of times in the yellow pages. Do people actually look at the yellow pages?
No, I called 411 the other day. It still exists.
But the other piece I'd add to that, in addition to knowing what you're buying or having a plan in place for the farming aspect of it, because everybody, I should say, almost everybody who is looking at a vineyard estate has bought and sold many houses.
Yeah. Yep.
Houses are no problem.
There's a whole new layer.
But there's a catch to that. Now we're talking about looking at a piece of farm ground.
Sure.
And the entitlements that go along with it. When I say entitlements, I'm talking about the permit or the ability to build a home, build additional buildings, split your property, build a second home, all those kinds of things. So many people will purchase, say, a vineyard estate like we're sitting on here and go, well, I'm going to build a second house. Okay, how are you going to do that? Do you know that there are only a couple different mechanisms to actually get to that? And you have to show income, or you have to show need, or it's got to be a familial farm dwelling or something of that nature. Or worse, we see, well, I'm going to buy a vineyard estate and I'm going to throw weddings, or I'm going to throw these big get-togethers. Well, guess what? There's not a clear-cut path within the EFU guideline to allow for that. You have to go down the road of some other entitlement. So anyway.
And for EFU, just so people know, can you just take us through that in a very short snippet?
Sure. The very short, so in Oregon, in rural property, I'm going to oversimplify it, but you have 4 different zoning classifications.
Yeah.
3 of them fall under something called resource. 1 is basically just rural residential. Rural residential, you're allowed to have a home pretty much no matter what. You're limited to what kind of commercial things
activities
you could do. The resource side is forest, aggregate, and farm. EFU is exclusive farm use in Jackson County. Other counties call it different things, but it falls under the same overall farm entitlement or farm zoning.
And each one of those are going to have different requirements to accomplish whatever an owner wants.
Correct. Some very simple things on farm. You can build pretty much as many farm support buildings as is deemed necessary as an entitlement for your farm.
Sure.
You can plant whatever crops you want to in the legal spectrum of, so that was a whole cannabis thing, but anyway, in the legal spectrum, but building a home is not an outright entitlement. It's conditionally can be approved. So
copy that. So circling back again, what are the 3 things that should be, important to a person looking to buy and or establish either a tasting room or a winery? What are the kind of 2 comparing points there?
I think the leading one would be location, just because when you're looking at something like a winery or tasting room, especially a tasting room, your distance to your consumer is critical, right? So we saw some tasting rooms struggle during COVID because the convenience factor to get there was less. So even if they were doing things like curbside pickup or those kinds of things, the drive time got to be too much for people.
Sure.
On the flip side, from a tasting room perspective, Chris and I were just having this conversation with a client. You have location and convenience, or you have experience, right? So it depends on what kind of experience you're wanting your consumer to have. So you could have an amazing tasting room in town that's 5 minutes away, or you could go out to the Applegate and be on the river.
Sure.
So location is key, but it also has to match what general feel you're wanting your clients to have when you go out there.
Gotcha.
I encourage people to have a vision,
Yeah.
and the vision is going to direct the location and what those criteria means. Can you explain maybe just real quick the difference tasting room winery, just mechanically speaking?
Yeah, so tasting room essentially is where a consumer can come, taste the wines, buy the wines, and the winery is where you're actually producing the wines.
So sales, production.
Correct.
And both of those are allowed on farm zone properties?
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess my question would be then, between the two, one is going to be kind of like a business, and then the other one is going to be kind of a production question that people will need to ask?
They can both be business. So some wineries run their business by doing, like he'd mentioned previously, custom crush, where they're just making wine for other people's tasting rooms.
Okay.
So their business model is just to produce the wine, and then they pass the baton, and somebody's business model is just to sell the wine.
Gotcha.
So, and then you can have some vertically integrated companies that both produce and sell their own wine.
Copy. And how do entitlements play into either one of those?
You need them. Make sure you have them.
Okay.
Yeah, so obviously the property needs to be zoned for farm.
Yeah.
That's step one. Step two, you need to have an established vineyard on site in order to qualify for those, unless you're zoned for a farm zone property. You need an established vineyard.
Yeah.
And then the details go from there. What's the
And there's some other provisions too, where you can have long-term contracts or non-adjacent vineyard ownership. It kind of gets into the weeds. So that's how sometimes you do see tasting rooms or wineries on smaller parcels. There's just a few more hoops to jump through to get that entitlement.
Well, and sometimes people will do a satellite tasting room
Yep.
in a commercially zoned property or
Yes.
in a restaurant strip somewhere in
Sure.
town that's
Copy.
separate from the farm.
So they have their base of operation and a place where people can enjoy it.
Well, yeah, there's a vineyard down here, had one all the way up in Newburgh,
Yep.
Oh, wow.
specifically as a sales outlet.
Interesting.
And you have a lot too sometimes that have satellite tasting rooms in towns like Jacksonville or something like that, where the consumer can get to it quicker.
Yeah.
That comes back to the whole convenience and experience thing.
Sure.
So as a business owner, you just find what starts to work for your consumer and the best channels to get your product to the
Consumer.
Yep.
And some of the custom crush facilities have their own little tasting rooms
With
as well.
all their
that
clients.
You as a small guy can go and have your product in that tasting room along
fun.
with, some other folks. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So then, kind of going off of what you said, where, you're kind of balancing this experience guideline versus where should I put the business, where should I have the tasting room. For those looking to do this, or in your experience as brokers and as appraiser, what are the most common mistakes or learning opportunities that you see people have to navigate in this industry?
Entitlements. Just kind of a true understanding of what they're buying or even what they're selling. Because even if you've owned a property for a long time, rules and regulations could have changed, right? So you might have a grandfathered use that a buyer needs to know if they change that use, maybe they can't do it again.
Yeah.
And so that comes into play a lot with the production side as far as capacity or events that they've been able to do.
Okay.
Because as time goes on, there may be more restrictions on those. But in general, just really understanding what you have, communicating that to a possible buyer, trying to answer all their questions up front. And then as a buyer, making sure you know what you're getting
Yeah.
in all the ways. It can be really overwhelming. And so we try to break it down: land, vineyard, entitlements, water. Yeah, you have to kind of compartmentalize and take them chunk at a time. Otherwise, it can be a lot.
And being that this is a lot, and you're talking to a lot of different people trying to accomplish a lot of different things, what is the biggest takeaway for you guys? Like the biggest benefit of working in this industry?
I just feel that we've been able to really help people, whether it's making some discoveries on properties that would have been a bad buy because it wasn't going to allow them to do what they wanted to do, and helping them find the one that allows them to do exactly what they do want to do, right? So that's literally our job, is to make sure what you're buying is what you want.
Sure.
Or what you're selling is as stated.
As advertised.
As advertised, right. There's no fine print somewhere.
Right.
And so just that whole process is really rewarding by giving people like the confidence to know that they can move forward
Sure.
with what they want to do.
Would you agree?
I think people go into, and I'm going to speak in general, not just vineyards,
Yeah.
but farm, ranch, rural property in general. And you have very much rose-colored glasses because it's exciting.
It's a dream.
An opportunity. It's a dream, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I feel like our job is to not discourage them, but to encourage them, but in an educational way, so it doesn't quickly switch from a dream to a nightmare.
Sure.
I bought this property and I can't do what I want to do with it. I bought this property and oh my goodness, I didn't need 100 acres, I needed 10.
Sure.
Whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And, to advocate both for their dream, but also for their best interest in the process of saying, hey, I've seen this before. My gut is telling me we need to have a heart-to-heart about this area over here where you think this is going to be really, really easy. And I can put you in touch with 20 people that'll tell you that's not really, really easy. Or on the flip side, a push that says, no, you should do this.
Yeah.
This is a really good opportunity. Do it. I feel like the advocacy role of both protecting their interests, but also encouraging that dream, it's kind of almost a dichotomy.
Yeah.
But it's the cool thing that we get to do because we do have that knowledge base to fall back on. And if we don't know the answer, we know someone, generally speaking, who can help us with that.
Absolutely.
So,
Because most of the times that when we're going through processes with buyers or sellers, it's not the first time we've experienced something that we have to work through.
Yeah.
And even if it is, because we've been in the industry for a long time and done quite a few transactions, we know who to call to get the answers at that point. And so just helping them navigate that process. And what Chris always tells me is just we need to ask our clients more questions.
Yeah.
Like if we're sitting there saying, like, did we think about this or did they realize this? We just start asking more questions.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, we want their goals to be what actually happens. And those rose-colored glasses sometimes need a different shade.
Yeah, need to come up for a moment or two.
and I will speak for a moment just about the real estate industry in general.
Yeah.
There's this misconception, I'll call it, that because you are in real estate, that a farm transaction or a ranch transaction or a vineyard or whatever that might be is just another real estate transaction that any broker has the skill set to do. And I've seen, fortunately not over and over, but enough times where a residential based or even sometimes a commercial based broker brokers a transaction, says, yes, this is a great idea, I think it's a good deal, so on and so forth. That client relies on that advocacy, and then there are significant challenges that come up after closing, especially having to do with what you said first, which is entitlements. Water is an entitlement. That is a permit for the property. Housing, tasting rooms. I can think of examples where people planned to do tasting rooms, but then found out they couldn't do tasting rooms due to easements that didn't allow it. Or I thought I had water rights on the well, but it turns out it was just a domestic well that they've been using for that, or things of that nature. Those are very much challenges, and I think that's what gives us peace and joy about doing what we do, is that we know our lane. It's these kinds of properties. And we get to have confidence walking in that lane.
Well, and that was kind of one of the big reasons why I joined Chris and his team when I transitioned from appraisal in the rural valuation sector. So I did lots more than just wineries and vineyards. I did hazelnuts and blueberries and rural estates and
everything in between,
processing facilities, all kinds of stuff. And I was sharing an office space with Chris for about 3 years before I joined his team. And when he talks about the knowledge base being different than a residential transaction, it's true. I think it's easy to try to simplify it, but it's not a simple process. And so when I would call to confirm sales data, Chris was consistently the one that remembered the clients, knew the properties, and had the information I as an appraiser needed to value the property.
Sure.
How many acres of water rights were there? I mean, it sounds like a crazy question, but you'd be surprised how many people I would call that just said whatever the district said. Well, what was that? I don't know. And so by staying in a lane, which is for us, rural and outdoor properties, I feel that we're able to just navigate, whether you're buying or selling, help navigate the challenges that pop up, because they always do. I've yet to have a transaction where we went from start to finish where there wasn't at least one thing we had to find a way to work through, because that's just the nature of real estate. And if I don't have an answer, I have a great team that I can call to find a way to the finish line.
I love it.
As a team, we appreciate the most about you, and I'm just I'll brag on you for a second, is the passion piece of people in real estate, and you get so excited about the process. Maybe not some of the problems, but the process
I
in
just
general.
call you for those. I just stay, yeah.
But I think that's what I would like to share, just for anyone who's listening, is that we truly are passionate about this sector of the market, not just vineyard, but farm, ranch, rural, but especially given Ashley's skill set, we have a high level of confidence in the vineyard sector.
Absolutely.
And what she's graciously shared with me, and I remember part of. What would you like to close with?
It's hard to express when you see someone's connection with a property. Like as an appraiser, I would go out, I'd be checking boxes, right? And I felt enjoyment knowing I had confidence in giving them a number that they could make their loan with or their estate planning with, those kinds of things. But when you are with a client who's either selling to transition to the next phase of life, and you get to hear the story of this amazing journey that they've been on and this amazing brand or business or property that they've built from the ground up, or helping a buyer find that, I get to go home every day knowing I've made a difference. And for me, that's been the most rewarding part of what I do. So I'm just thankful that I was given the opportunity to be here and to take a 10 plus year knowledge and not just scrap it and have it go away by starting all over, but to be able to utilize it and just connect with people and help them, enter the industry, expand in the industry.
Yeah. It's shared passion.
Yeah.
It really is.
Absolutely. Well, if you're looking for someone to be your advocate and have a shared passion for vineyards and wineries, call Chris and Ashley. Thank you both so much for taking us through all of this. This has been incredible.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.